The whistle of the incoming train pierced the crisp morning air as Dahlia Winters clutched her single carpetbag against her chest, her knuckles white with anticipation. The year was 1879, and after a grueling journey from Philadelphia, she had finally reached Leadville, Colorado, a bustling mining town nestled high in the Rocky Mountains. All she had left in the world was the modest dress she wore, a few personal belongings, and the letter from Vincent Mackenzie promising her a new life as his bride. Leadville, final stop before the pass. The conductor called out, his voice gruff from years of shouting over the train's rumble. Dahlia stepped onto the wooden platform, immediately feeling the thin mountain air fill her lungs. At 22, she had never ventured west of the Mississippi, and the imposing peaks surrounding the town made her feel smaller than she ever had before. The bustling platform was crowded with miners, merchants, and travelers, but there was no sign of the man who had agreed to marry her, Miss Winters. A boy no older than 12 approached her, cap in hand. "Mr. Mackenzie sent me to fetch you. He couldn't come himself on account of a situation with his cattle." "Oh," Dahlia said, unable to hide her disappointment. She had exchanged letters with Vincent for nearly 6 months, and his absence at their first meeting stung more than she wanted to admit. "Lead the way, then." The boy, who introduced himself as Tommy, helped her into a wagon, and they set off through the streets of Leadville. The town was larger than Dahlia had imagined, with wooden buildings lining the main street, some reaching 2 or 3 stories high. Mining equipment and supply stores dominated the landscape, interspersed with saloons where boisterous laughter spilled out into the street despite the early hour. "How far is Mr. Mackenzie's ranch?" Dahlia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "'Bout 5 miles outside of town, madam. It's one of the prettier spots in the valley. Not too many trees, but plenty of good grazing land. Mr. Mackenzie's got himself nearly 300 head of cattle now." Dahlia nodded, recalling Vincent's letters describing his growing herd. He had written of his dreams to build a prosperous cattle ranch, how he'd saved for years working as a ranch hand before purchasing his own land. What he needed now, he had written, was a wife to share in his success and help make his house a home. As they left the bustle of Leadville behind, the landscape opened up into a vast valley. Snow-capped mountains framed the horizon, and the autumn sun cast long shadows across the golden grass. It was breathtakingly beautiful, yet terrifyingly foreign to a city girl like Dahlia. "There it is," Tommy pointed as they crested a small hill. "Mackenzie Ranch." Below them spread a modest but well-kept property. A 2-story wooden house stood proudly near a creek that cut through the property. Several outbuildings, including a large barn and what appeared to be a bunkhouse, were positioned nearby. In the distance, Dahlia could make out the dark shapes of cattle grazing. As they approached, a tall figure emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. Even from a distance, Dahlia recognized him from the small photograph he had sent with his 3rd letter. Vincent Mackenzie was a broad-shouldered man with a stern face weathered by years under the Colorado sun. His dark hair was longer than in the photograph, and he wore a full beard now. Tommy brought the wagon to a stop, and Vincent approached, his stride confident but measured. Dahlia felt her heart racing as he reached the wagon and finally looked up at her with eyes the color of a storm-clouded sky. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice deeper than she had imagined. "Welcome to Leadville." He extended a hand to help her down. Dahlia placed her gloved hand in his and felt the strength in his grip as he assisted her from the wagon. "Mr. Mackenzie, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "I apologize for not meeting you at the station. Had a heifer calving early and couldn't leave her." Tommy explained. "I understand." An awkward silence settled between them before Vincent cleared his throat. "Let me show you to the house. You must be tired after your journey." As they walked toward the house, Dahlia felt the weight of her decision pressing down upon her. She had left everything behind her position as a seamstress, the few friends she had, the familiarity of city life, all to marry a man she knew only through correspondence. A man who now seemed far more intimidating in person than he had in his carefully penned letters. The house was simple but sturdy, with a large kitchen and sitting room downstairs, and what Vincent explained were 3 bedrooms upstairs. A cast iron stove dominated the kitchen, and a few pieces of practical furniture filled the sitting room. It was clean but sparse, lacking the feminine touches that would make it truly a home. "It's not much," Vincent said, watching her carefully, "but it's solid. Built it myself with some help from neighbors." "It's lovely," Dahlia replied, meaning it despite the simplicity. "You've done well for yourself, Mr. Mackenzie." "Vincent," he corrected. "If we're to be married, you should call me Vincent." Dahlia nodded, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "And you should call me Dahlia." He showed her to what would be her room until the wedding, explaining that the preacher came through Leadville once a month. "He'll be here in 2 weeks' time. I figured that would give you a chance to settle in and, well, to make sure this is what you want." Dahlia appreciated his consideration. Many mail-order marriages were conducted the day the bride arrived, giving the woman no chance to change her mind if the situation wasn't as promised. "That's very thoughtful." "I'm not one to trap a woman in a situation she doesn't want," Vincent said simply. "The West is hard enough when you choose it willingly." After showing her around the house, Vincent excused himself to return to his chores, leaving Dahlia alone to unpack her meager belongings. As she hung her 3 dresses in the wardrobe, she fought back tears of uncertainty. The room, like the rest of the house, was functional but barren. Just a bed, a wardrobe, and a small table with a wash basin. From her window, she could see Vincent in the distance, working with one of his ranch hands to repair a section of fencing. His movements were efficient and strong, his concentration complete. Dahlia wondered if she would ever truly know this man who was to be her husband. That evening, dinner was a quiet affair. Vincent wasn't much for conversation, answering her questions about the ranch and the area with short, direct responses. His manners, however, were impeccable, and he treated her with a respect that gave her hope. "I hired Mrs. Holloway from town to help with preparations for the wedding," he said as they finished their meal of beef stew and fresh bread. "She'll be coming out 3 times a week until then. I thought you might appreciate another woman to talk with." Dahlia smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. That would be lovely." Vincent nodded, then added hesitantly, "I know this isn't easy, coming all this way to marry a stranger. I want you to know I'll do right by you, Dahlia. I may not be much for words, but I keep my promises." "I believe you," she replied softly. The next morning, Dahlia woke early, determined to begin making herself useful. She found Vincent already in the kitchen, preparing coffee before heading out for his morning chores. "Good morning," she said, smoothing down her dress. "I'd like to make breakfast if that's all right." Vincent looked surprised but nodded. "There's eggs in the pantry and bacon hanging in the cold room. I usually just have coffee and biscuits, but—" "I'll make a proper breakfast," Dahlia said with more confidence than she felt. In Philadelphia, she had shared lodgings with other working women and had learned to cook simple meals, but never for a man she was expected to impress. By the time Vincent returned from his first round of chores, Dahlia had managed to prepare a respectable breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. The bacon was a bit too crisp and the biscuits slightly dense, but Vincent ate with obvious appreciation. "This is good," he said between bites. "Real good." Dahlia felt a small surge of pride. "I'll improve with practice." "No need. This is better than anything I've had in a long while. Usually just cook whatever's easiest after a long day's work." After breakfast, Vincent showed her around the property properly. The ranch was larger than it had first appeared, with good water access and protected grazing land. He explained his plans for expansion, pointing out where he hoped to build additional fencing and possibly a larger barn in the coming years. "I've got 2 hands who work for me full-time, Miguel and Jeremiah. They stay in the bunkhouse. Good men, both of them. During calving season or roundup, I hire on extra help." He glanced at her. "They'll keep their distance from the house unless invited. I've made that clear." Dahlia appreciated his consideration for her comfort. "I'd like to meet them properly when convenient," Vincent nodded. "You will at supper tonight. Mrs. Holloway usually cooks when she's here, but on other days, the men fend for themselves or join me if I offer." As they walked back toward the house, Vincent stopped and turned to her. "There's something you should know, Dahlia. Ranching isn't always predictable or easy. There will be long days when I'm gone before dawn and back after dark. There might be nights I don't make it back at all if we're moving cattle or dealing with trouble. It's not the life most women would choose." Dahlia met his gaze steadily. "I didn't come west expecting an easy life, Vincent. I came seeking a new beginning, and I'm prepared for the challenges that come with it." Something in his expression softened slightly. "Good. Because I need a partner, not just a wife who'll wilt at the first sign of hardship." That evening, Dahlia met Miguel Rodriguez and Jeremiah Cooper, Vincent's ranch hands. Miguel was in his late 30s, a skilled horseman who had worked cattle ranches across the West for most of his life. Jeremiah was younger, perhaps 25, with an easy laugh and quick wit that balanced Vincent's more serious demeanor. Both men were respectful, removing their hats in her presence and speaking politely. Dahlia could see they held Vincent in high regard, following his lead and deferring to his judgment. It spoke well of him as an employer and a man. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Dahlia took over the cooking and began putting her sewing skills to use, mending work clothes and adding small touches to the house curtains for the windows, a tablecloth for the dining table, cushions for the hard wooden chairs. Vincent noticed these changes but said little, though she sometimes caught him looking at her handiwork with appreciation in his eyes. Mrs. Holloway, a widow in her 50s with a practical outlook and kind heart, came as promised to help prepare for the wedding. She brought with her fabrics for a wedding dress and shared the latest town gossip as they sewed together. "You've chosen well, coming to Mr. Mackenzie," she told Dahlia during her second visit. "He's respected in these parts, honest in his dealings and fair with his men. Some of the other ranchers around here wouldn't be half so considerate to a new bride." "He's been very accommodating," Dahlia agreed. "But sometimes I feel as though I barely know him. He's not one for long conversations." Mrs. Holloway chuckled. "Men out here tend to let their actions speak louder than words. Vincent Mackenzie might not spin pretty phrases, but you watch how he treats you, how he provides. That tells you more about a man than all the flowery talk in the world." A week into Dahlia's stay at the ranch, a fierce autumn storm blew in from the mountains. Wind howled around the house, rattling the windows and driving rain against the glass. Vincent and his men worked frantically to secure the property and move vulnerable cattle to sheltered areas. Dahlia spent the day ensuring the house was prepared, filling lamps with oil, bringing in extra firewood, and preparing food that could be eaten quickly between trips outside. When Vincent finally returned to the house, soaked to the skin and exhausted, she had hot coffee waiting and stew keeping warm on the stove. "Thank you," he said, accepting the steaming mug with grateful hands. "It's turning nasty out there. Might be in for a long night." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Dahlia asked. Vincent considered her question seriously rather than dismissing it as many men might have. "Actually, yes. If you could keep watch at the north window while I check the south pasture again. If you see any cattle breaking through the fence line, ring the bell on the porch. Miguel will hear it and respond." Dahlia nodded, pleased to be trusted with a meaningful task. "I can do that." For hours, she maintained her vigil, watching through rain-streaked windows as occasional lightning illuminated the landscape. Twice, she spotted cattle pushing against weakened sections of fence and sounded the alarm as instructed. By midnight, the storm began to ease and Vincent returned to the house, mud splattered but relieved. "We didn't lose any to the creek flooding," he reported, "and the barn roof held. Could have been much worse." He looked at her with new appreciation. "You did well tonight." Not every woman would have kept her head in a situation like this. "I'm glad I could help," Dahlia replied, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction. "Would you like some hot food? I've kept the stew warm." They sat together at the kitchen table, eating in comfortable silence as the storm continued to dissipate outside. For the first time, the quiet between them didn't feel awkward or strained but peaceful, like the calm after the storm. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" Vincent asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Your letters never really said." Dahlia considered her answer carefully. "My parents died when I was 18. I had been working as a seamstress since then, but the factory where I worked burned down last winter. Jobs were scarce and my savings were dwindling." She hesitated. "But that's not the only reason. I wanted more than just surviving day to day. I wanted a chance at building something meaningful, at having a real home again." Vincent nodded slowly. "And why choose me out of all the men advertising?" "Your letters were honest," Dahlia said simply. "You didn't make grand promises or paint an unrealistic picture. You wrote about hard work and simple living, but also about building something lasting. That resonated with me." Something in Vincent's expression changed, a subtle softening around his eyes. "I'm not good with fancy words, Dahlia. Never have been. But I meant what I wrote to you. I'm building something here, something that will last beyond my years." I needed someone who understood that vision, who could share in it. It was the most he had spoken at one time since her arrival, and Dahlia felt as if a door had been cracked open between them. "I'd like to share in it, Vincent, if you'll teach me what I need to know." The storm marked a turning point in their relationship. Over the following days, Vincent began to include Dahlia more in the workings of the ranch. He taught her how to manage the household accounts, explained the seasonal cycles of ranching, and even showed her how to handle a rifle just in case, he said. "Though I hope you'll never need it." Dahlia absorbed these lessons eagerly, asking questions and taking notes. Her genuine interest seemed to please Vincent, who became increasingly animated when explaining his methods and plans. She discovered that, beneath his reserved exterior, was a man of intelligence and foresight, who had built his ranch through careful planning and relentless work. As the wedding approached, Dahlia found herself looking forward to it with growing certainty rather than apprehension. Vincent was not the romantic figure she might have dreamed of as a young girl, but he was honest, dependable, and kind in his own quiet way. She had begun to see that his reticence wasn't coldness, but a thoughtful nature that considered words carefully before speaking them. The night before Mrs. Holloway was to arrive for final wedding preparations, Vincent invited Dahlia to join him for an evening ride. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said, helping her mount a gentle mare he had selected for her use. They rode across the property, as the setting sun painted the mountains in brilliant shades of purple and gold. Vincent led her to a hill overlooking the ranch, where a single oak tree stood sentinel against the vast sky. "This is my favorite spot on the whole property," he said as they dismounted. "You can see everything from here: the house, the barn, the creek, the grazing land." He paused, looking out over his domain with quiet pride. "I came here the day I bought this land and promised myself I'd build something worthwhile." Dahlia stood beside him, taking in the panoramic view. "You've succeeded, Vincent. What you've built here is impressive." He turned to face her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Dahlia, before we marry, I want you to know that I don't expect you to be just a housekeeper or a cook. I meant what I said about wanting a partner. This ranch, it could be more than it is now, with the right hands tending it." "What do you envision?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I've been thinking about expanding beyond cattle. Perhaps some crops in the lower fields, maybe even an orchard eventually. The mining boom won't last forever, but people will always need food." He hesitated. "And I've set aside land for a proper garden. I know city folk like their vegetables and such." Dahlia smiled, touched by this consideration. "I'd like that very much. I've never had a garden of my own, but I've always wanted to try growing things." Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I meant to give you this before the wedding, but, well, seems like the right moment now." Inside the box was a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," Vincent explained. "My father gave it to her when they settled in Colorado Territory back in '59. She always said the blue reminded her of the mountain sky." Dahlia felt tears welling in her eyes as Vincent took the ring and, with slightly trembling hands, slipped it onto her finger. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like I said, I'm not one for fancy words, Dahlia. But I want you to know that I'll do everything in my power to make sure you never regret coming here. I'll provide for you, protect you, and respect you as my wife and partner in all things." In that moment, with the setting sun casting long shadows across the land that would be their shared home, Dahlia knew she had made the right choice. She reached up and gently touched Vincent's weather-roughened cheek. "Thank you for bringing me here, Vincent. Not just to this spot, but to Leadville, to your home. Our home." He covered her hand with his own, and though he didn't speak, his eyes said everything his words couldn't express. The wedding took place on a clear October day, with the aspen trees shimmering gold against the mountainsides. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held in the small white church in Leadville with Mrs. Holloway, Miguel, Jeremiah, and a handful of neighboring ranchers and townspeople as witnesses. Dahlia wore the dress she and Mrs. Holloway had sewn, a pale blue creation trimmed with lace she had saved from her mother's wedding gown. Vincent, cleaned up and uncomfortable in his best clothes, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of wonder, as if seeing her for the first time. "You look beautiful," he whispered when she reached his side. The words meant only for her ears. The preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Thomas, led them through their vows with warmth and sincerity. When Vincent placed the gold band on Dahlia's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady and sure, his voice clear as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Their first kiss as husband and wife was brief but tender, Vincent's lips pressing against hers with gentle reverence. It was a promise more than a passion, but Dahlia felt a flutter of anticipation for what their future might hold. A celebration followed at the town's hotel, where Mrs. Holloway had arranged for a modest feast. The townsfolk welcomed Dahlia warmly, the women especially pleased to have a new face among their community. Several invited her to social gatherings and church functions, and Dahlia accepted gratefully, knowing that building connections would be important in her new life. As the afternoon wore on, Vincent remained by her side, occasionally touching her elbow or the small of her back as if reassuring himself of her presence. Though still not talkative in the crowd, he made an effort to introduce her properly to everyone, his pride evident in his bearing. "You've done well for yourself, Mackenzie," one of the older ranchers commented, tipping his glass toward them. "A fine wife and a growing operation. Your father would have been proud." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Vincent replied, his hand finding Dahlia's. "I believe he would have been." By the time they returned to the ranch, dusk was settling over the land, painting everything in soft shades of purple and blue. Vincent helped Dahlia down from the wagon with careful hands, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Mrs. Mackenzie," he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he carried her toward the house. "Welcome home." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with tender curiosity. Vincent was considerate and gentle, his calloused hands reverent as they explored her body. Dahlia, though inexperienced, found herself responding with unexpected ardor to his touch, her initial nervousness melting away in the warmth of their shared bed. Afterward, lying in the circle of Vincent's arms as moonlight spilled through the window, Dahlia felt a profound sense of rightness. This man, her husband, might not be the romantic hero of childhood dreams, but he was real and solid, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. "Are you happy, Dahlia?" Vincent asked softly, his fingers trailing through her loose hair. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" His arms tightened around her. "More than I expected to be." As autumn deepened into winter, Dahlia settled fully into her role as Mrs. Mackenzie. The house transformed under her care, becoming warmer and more inviting with each passing week. She learned to cook heartier meals suited to the cold climate and the appetites of working men, to manage the household supplies through the long stretches when snow made trips to town difficult, and to anticipate the needs of the ranch before they became urgent. Vincent, true to his word, treated her as a partner rather than a possession. He sought her opinion on ranch matters, taught her the basics of animal husbandry, and included her in decisions about their future. In the evenings, they would often sit together by the fire, Vincent reading aloud from one of the books Dahlia had brought with her while she mended or worked on some new addition to their home. Their physical relationship deepened as well, initial hesitancy giving way to a passionate connection that surprised them both. Vincent, who had lived so long with only his own company, found in Dahlia a warmth and tenderness he hadn't known he craved. Dahlia discovered that her quiet, serious husband could be playful and even romantic in the privacy of their bedroom. The first major test of their new partnership came in December, when a brutal snowstorm threatened the cattle. Vincent and his men worked tirelessly to bring the herd closer to the ranch buildings where hay could be distributed, but the bitter cold and deep snow made the work dangerous. Dahlia kept the house warm and ready, preparing hot meals and coffee that could be taken quickly between efforts outside. When Miguel returned supporting a limping Jeremiah, who had fallen and twisted his ankle in a snowdrift, she took charge without hesitation. "Bring him to the kitchen," she directed, already gathering bandages and medicines she had wisely stocked at Mrs. Holloway's suggestion. "Vincent, there's hot coffee on the stove and stew keeping warm. Miguel, once you've had something to eat, take fresh supplies out to the north pasture fence line. I've packed a satchel." The men followed her instructions without question, recognizing the authority in her voice. As she wrapped Jeremiah's ankle and instructed him on keeping it elevated, she noticed Vincent watching her with approval, and something like pride. That night, after the immediate crisis had passed and the cattle were secure, Vincent found her in the kitchen, preparing dough for the next day's bread. "You were impressive today," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Took charge like you've been running a ranch your whole life." Dahlia smiled, brushing flour from her hands. "I just did what needed doing." "That's exactly it." He crossed the room to stand beside her. "Most people talk about doing what's needed, you just do it." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being exactly what this place needed. What I needed." As winter settled in earnest over Leadville, life on the ranch took on a different rhythm. With the cattle requiring less daily attention, Vincent turned his focus to repairs and improvements that had been postponed during busier seasons. He built new shelving in the kitchen at Dahlia's request, repaired weakened sections of fencing, and began working on plans for spring planting. Dahlia used the time to fully organize the household, establishing systems that would serve them well in the busier seasons to come. She cataloged their supplies, learned to preserve the meat Vincent brought from his hunting expeditions, and began piecing together quilts from fabric scraps, practical skills she had never needed in Philadelphia, but which were essential to ranch life. They made occasional trips into town when the weather permitted, attending church services and gradually becoming more involved in the community. Dahlia joined the Ladies' Aid Society, using her sewing skills to help create clothing for those in need. Vincent, though still reserved in large gatherings, made an effort to participate in community meetings and events at Dahlia's gentle encouragement. It was during a January thaw, when the snow had retreated enough to make travel easier, that Dahlia began to suspect she might be expecting a child. She kept the possibility to herself at first, wanting to be certain before sharing such momentous news with Vincent. But as the weeks passed and her symptoms persisted, she could no longer deny the changes in her body. One evening, as they sat together near the fire after supper, Dahlia gathered her courage. "Vincent, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the leather he was working, his attention immediately focused on her. "What is it?" "I believe. That is, I'm quite certain." She took a deep breath. "We're going to have a baby, probably in late summer by my calculations." Vincent went very still, his hands freezing in mid-motion. For a terrible moment, Dahlia feared he might not be pleased. Then his face transformed with a smile broader than any she had yet seen from him. "A baby," he repeated, setting aside his work and moving to kneel before her chair. "You're certain?" Dahlia nodded, relief washing through her at his obvious joy. "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation." Vincent placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, his expression one of wonder. "A child, our child." He looked up at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you, Dahlia, for this gift." He leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss filled with tenderness and promise. The news of their coming child seemed to energize Vincent. He threw himself into preparations with characteristic thoroughness, expanding his plans for the ranch to include improvements to the house. When Dahlia mentioned converting the unused third bedroom into a nursery, Vincent surprised her by suggesting they build an addition instead. "We'll need more than one extra room eventually," he said with quiet confidence. "I've always wanted a large family." Dahlia, who had grown up as an only child and had often longed for siblings, found herself delighted by the prospect. "How many children are you hoping for, Mr. Mackenzie?" she teased. Vincent pretended to consider the question seriously. "Well, Mrs. Mackenzie, I figure we need at least 4 or 5 to help run this place properly." She laughed, resting her hands on her stomach. "Let's start with this one and see how we fare." As winter slowly released its grip on the mountains, Dahlia's body changed with the seasons. The slight swelling of her abdomen was barely noticeable to others, but Vincent seemed fascinated by every change, his hands gentle as they traced the new curves of her body in the privacy of their bedroom. With spring came renewed activity on the ranch. Calving season kept Vincent and his men busy day and night, sometimes requiring Dahlia's assistance with difficult births. She found herself developing a new appreciation for the cycle of life on the ranch, for the interconnectedness of their work with the natural world. One crisp April morning, as new grass was beginning to green the valley, Vincent surprised Dahlia with a gift. A plot of land near the house had been fenced and prepared for the garden he had promised her. "It's not much yet," he said, watching her face as she surveyed the rich, turned earth. "But the soil's good. Mrs. Holloway helped me choose the spot, says it gets the right amount of sun for growing vegetables." Dahlia walked the perimeter of the garden, already envisioning rows of carrots, potatoes, beans, and perhaps even some flowers to brighten their table. "It's perfect, Vincent." "Absolutely perfect," he smiled, pleased by her reaction. "Thought you might want to plant some things that remind you of back east, and maybe try some crops that do well out here." "I'd like that very much." She turned to face him. "Though I find I miss Philadelphia less and less these days." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, the question clearly important to him. "Coming out here, I mean." Dahlia considered the question honestly. The past 6 months had been challenging in many ways. She had worked harder than ever before, endured the isolation of winter on the ranch, and adapted to a way of life entirely foreign to her upbringing. Yet she had also found purpose, respect, and a deepening love for the taciturn man who had become the center of her world. "Not for a moment," she answered truthfully. "This is home now." The relief in Vincent's face was evident, though he tried to hide it. "Good, because I can't imagine this place without you anymore." As Dahlia's pregnancy progressed, the ranch continued to flourish under their combined care. Vincent's cattle herd grew with a successful calving season, and he was able to hire an additional hand to help with the increased workload. Dahlia's garden thrived under her attentive care, providing fresh vegetables for their table and enough extra to preserve for the coming winter. In late May, they received a letter from a family in Denver, friends of Mrs. Holloway's, who were looking to relocate to the high country. The Johnsons had 3 daughters of marrying age who had found few prospects in the city and were hoping to find work and eventually husbands in Leadville. "Mrs. Holloway thinks we might consider hiring one of the girls to help around the ranch, especially with the baby coming," Dahlia explained as she read the letter to Vincent over breakfast. "Apparently the oldest, Rebecca, is an excellent cook and experienced with childcare." Vincent considered the idea. "Might not be a bad notion. You shouldn't be doing heavy work in your condition, and things will only get busier as we approach summer roundup." "I'm hardly an invalid," Dahlia protested mildly, "but I admit some help would be welcome, especially once the baby arrives." They decided to offer Rebecca Johnson a position, with room and board in the house and a small salary. When the Johnson family arrived in Leadville 2 weeks later, Dahlia and Vincent went to town to meet them and finalize the arrangement. Rebecca proved to be a sensible young woman of 20, with a cheerful disposition and capable hands. She accepted their offer eagerly, and within days had settled into the ranch routine, taking over much of the cooking and heavier housework that had become increasingly difficult for Dahlia as her pregnancy advanced. With Rebecca's help, Dahlia was able to focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny garments in the evenings, lined a drawer with soft flannel for the baby's first bed, and read everything she could find about childbirth and infant care. Vincent, meanwhile, began work on the promised addition to the house. With Miguel and Jeremiah's help, he laid the foundation for 2 new rooms, a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, and another room that could serve as either a guest room or a second children's room in the future. "You're building for a family dynasty," Dahlia teased as she brought lunch to the men one hot June day. Vincent wiped sweat from his brow, looking over the framework with satisfaction. "Just planning ahead. A good rancher always plans for growth." As summer heated the valley, Dahlia's time grew nearer. Her body felt increasingly unwieldy, and the heat made her uncomfortable, but Vincent's constant attentiveness eased her discomfort. He insisted she rest during the hottest part of the day, brought her cool water from the springhouse, and often massaged her swollen feet and aching back in the evenings. "You'll spoil me," she protested one night as his strong hands worked the tension from her shoulders. "You deserve spoiling," he replied simply. "You're giving me the greatest gift a man could ask for." In early August, with the addition to the house nearly complete, Dahlia woke in the pre-dawn hours to sharp pain low in her abdomen. She lay still for a moment, waiting to see if it would pass, but another contraction soon followed. "Vincent," she whispered, touching his shoulder, "I think it's time." He was instantly alert, rising to light the lamp beside their bed. "Are you certain?" She nodded, wincing as another pain gripped her. "Yes, but there's time yet. First babies often take a while." Vincent dressed quickly. "I'll send Jeremiah for the midwife and wake Rebecca. What do you need now? Just help me up. I'd rather walk a bit while I can." Vincent supported her as she paced the bedroom, pausing to breathe through contractions that gradually increased in frequency and intensity. By the time Mrs. Carmichael, the town midwife, arrived, Dahlia was finding it difficult to walk or talk through the pain. "You men clear out now, Mrs. Carmichael ordered as she assessed the situation. "Rebecca and I will handle things from here." Vincent hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Dahlia's side. "I'd rather stay if Dahlia wants me to." "It's not proper," the midwife began, but Dahlia interrupted. "I want him here," she said firmly, reaching for Vincent's hand. "At least for now." Mrs. Carmichael relented with a shrug. "Suit yourself. But don't go fainting on me if things get difficult, Mr. Mackenzie. I've no time to be tending to both of you." Vincent stayed, his presence a steady anchor as Dahlia labored through the morning and into the afternoon. When the pain became nearly unbearable and she cried out that she couldn't continue, he wiped her brow with cool cloths and murmured encouragement in her ear. "You're the strongest woman I know, Dahlia Mackenzie. Our child is lucky to have you for a mother." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Dahlia's labor intensified. Mrs. Carmichael positioned her for the final stage, and Vincent supported her from behind, his arms providing stability as she pushed. With a final, tremendous effort, their child entered the world a robust boy with a powerful set of lungs that he immediately put to use. Mrs. Carmichael cleaned and swaddled him efficiently before placing him in Dahlia's trembling arms. "Congratulations," the midwife said with a satisfied smile. "A fine, healthy son." Dahlia gazed down at the tiny red face, overcome with a love so powerful it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Vincent leaned forward to look at his son, his expression a mixture of awe and fierce pride. He touched the baby's cheek with a single finger, his calloused hand looking enormous next to the infant's delicate features. "He's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like his mother." They named him William James Mackenzie, William after Vincent's father and James after Dahlia's. From his first days, it was clear that Will had inherited his father's strength and his mother's determination. He nursed vigorously, grew steadily, and regarded the world with alert, curious eyes that soon shifted from newborn blue to a hazel very like Vincent's. Vincent took to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to all things. He wasn't afraid to hold his son or change him when needed, and often carried him around the ranch in the evenings, pointing out cattle and horses to the infant as if he could understand every word. "He needs to learn the operation from the ground up," Vincent explained when Dahlia found them in the barn one evening, while sleeping peacefully against his father's chest as Vincent checked on a pregnant mare. "And you think he's absorbing the finer points of horse breeding at 3 weeks old?" She teased gently. Vincent smiled, one of the free, unguarded smiles that had become more frequent since Will's birth. Never too early to start. As autumn painted the aspen trees gold once more, marking a full year since Dahlia's arrival in Colorado, the Mackenzie ranch had transformed in ways neither of them could have predicted. The house was now a true home, filled with the warmth of family and the promise of future growth. The ranch operation had expanded, with plans for further diversification in the coming years. Most significantly, Dahlia and Vincent themselves had changed. Dahlia had discovered reserves of strength and adaptability she hadn't known she possessed. The city girl who had arrived with nothing but hope and a carpetbag had become a capable ranch wife, respected in the community and confident in her new role. Vincent, once so reserved and solitary, had opened himself to the joys of family life. He smiled more readily, spoke more freely, and had developed a playful side that emerged especially when interacting with his son. On the anniversary of Dahlia's arrival, Vincent surprised her by asking Rebecca to watch Will for the evening. He saddled their horses and led her back to the oak tree on the hill where he had given her his mother's ring. "I thought we should mark the occasion," he said as they settled on a blanket he had brought. The valley spread before them in autumn splendor. From a saddlebag he produced a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "It's been quite a year," Dahlia remarked as he poured the wine. "So much has changed." "For the better, I hope," Vincent said, handing her a glass. "For the better," she confirmed with a smile. "Though I didn't expect quite so many changes quite so quickly." Vincent chuckled, the sound still somewhat rare but increasingly familiar. "Life has a way of moving faster than our plans." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the setting sun gild the landscape. Then Vincent reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly seeming almost shy. "It's not much, but—" Dahlia unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a locket on a slender gold chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Will on one side and Vincent on the other, miniatures painted by a traveling artist who had passed through Leadville the previous month. "Oh, Vincent," she breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "It's beautiful." "I thought you might like having us close to your heart," he said, helping her fasten the chain around her neck. "Since you've been in mine since the day you stepped off that train." Dahlia touched the locket where it rested against her skin, then leaned forward to kiss him softly. "Thank you. Not just for this, but for everything. For believing I could be the partner you needed, for giving me a home and a family when I had neither." Vincent drew her into his arms, holding her close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "You came here with nothing but hope, Dahlia, but you brought everything I needed: courage, kindness, strength. I couldn't have built this life alone." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, the windows of their home glowing with welcoming light in the distance, Dahlia reflected on the journey that had brought her west. She had arrived a stranger in a strange land, betting her future on the promise of a new beginning. What she had found was beyond anything she could have imagined: not just security or comfort, but a deep and abiding love, a purpose larger than herself, and the joy of creating a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Vincent reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Together they rode toward home, toward their sleeping son, toward the future they would continue to build side by side. Years later, when the Mackenzie Ranch had grown to become one of the most prosperous operations in Colorado, when Will had been joined by 3 siblings, 2 sisters, and another brother, and the house had expanded to accommodate their growing family, Dahlia would sometimes return to that oak tree on the hill. There, with the ranch spread below her like a living map of their shared life, she would touch the locket still hanging around her neck and remember the young woman who had stepped off a train with nothing but hope in her heart. That hope had been more than enough. It had been the foundation upon which everything else was built: the courage to leave the familiar behind, the strength to face new challenges, the faith that love would grow in even the rockiest soil. And Vincent, with his quiet steadfastness and unwavering devotion, had given her everything she needed to transform that hope into a life more fulfilling than she had ever dared to dream.